Hello and welcome once again to the WAN-IFRA Indian Media Leaders e-Summit. The topic for the discussion in this session is the future of digital advertising, preparing for a cookieless future and innovations at work. Now, let me give you a brief idea about what the session is about. So, shutting down segments of third-party data since the beginning of this year and using first-party data has been creating several segments of the target audience that has helped the New York Times to offer a superior product and build a better relationship with its audience. So the idea is to have two people from the NYTimes to talk to you about work at New York Times. We all know that the New York Times has been able to transform itself in a fantastic manner for the digital age. So we have here with us Mariam Melikadze, who is the Director Data Insights Group at the New York Times. Mariam is she supports the advertising business through data-driven insights and analytics. She and her team have most recently worked on the company's first party data program. Previously, she ran analytics at an insurance startup in Boston and worked in management consulting at InnoSight. Pranay Prabhat is Senior Director of Engineering at the New York Times, a student of IIT Kanpur, where he did his Bachelor of Technology. He leads multiple engineering teams across the web, mobile, backend, and data to handle the digital ads business at the NYTimes. Previously, he was Director of Engineering for Ad Technology and a Development Manager of Engineering. Before joining the New York Times in 2015, he was a Technical Product Manager in the US in a technology company. Prior to that, he held various software engineering positions at Putney Computers, IBM, and Fidelity India. Welcome to this session, and over to you for your presentation. And after that, we will take a Q&A. Those of you who have questions, please post them in the Q&A tab, and we will have Pranay and Mariam take it from you later. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Pradyuman. Hello, everyone. As Pradyuman said, I oversee the digital ads engineering at the New York Times. I am truly honored to be invited here. India is my home country, and I'm glad to share some of the work which we are doing at the New York Times. Let me share my screen to get started with the presentation. I hope that you guys can see the presentation, right? Seems yes. Okay, cool. So the topic of my talk will be publisher ads monetization and audience data. As you can see that the cookie over here is slowly going away, and that is what the risk we have with publisher ads monetization. And some of the things which I'll be talking about is how can we save it? How can we innovate to restore the cookie back? Okay, so let's start with some basics here. What are cross-context identifiers?
Sorry, Pranay, we can't see the slide.
Wait, I just moved the tab.
Oh, I think maybe because you moved it. Can you try stopping and sharing it again?
You know what? Yeah, one thing which is possible is that because I shared the Chrome tab.
Try stopping and sharing it again.
This is what technology does sometimes to all of us, right?
Okay, is the presentation back for you all?
Yes, we can see the cookies, yes.
And did the slide move?
Yes, it
yes.
Okay, yeah. Wonderful, wonderful. So, so let's talk about a couple of fundamental points here for 2 minutes. So, what are cross-context identifiers? You must have heard about things like IDFA in iOS, Ad ID in Android, third-party cookies in the browser. So, as a marketer, you will be ensuring that your marketing spend is highly optimized and is reaching the right audience. And in order to do that, advertising industry heavily relies on these cross-context identifiers to reach the right consumer at the right time. Some of the use cases of these cross-context identifiers, for an example, behavior targeting. So you went and saw an article on site A, you went to site B, and you saw an ad based on what you read on site A. How is this done? This is like third-party cookies in the browser. They join what your reading history is across the sites. The other use case is retargeting. So you went to site A, you added a product to the cart, you forgot buying it. You went to site B a couple of days later, and you saw an ad for what you added in the cart on site A. This is the retargeting, again done through third-party cookies and cross-site identifiers. There is also something very important for marketers is frequency capping. That is how many times you are showing the same ad to the same user. You need to be careful that you don't want to bombard a user with 50 ads of the same time, because that way they will be very frustrated. And that's where frequency capping comes into picture. And then conversion and attribution. This is also a very important pillar in digital ads industry, which is how does a marketer measures their return on investment? You saw an ad on site A. Couple of days later, you saw the same ad on site B. And then you went on site C, say a day later, and you bought that product. So in this case, who gets the credit for that ultimate conversion? This is where there are tons of conversion and attribution models in place, and all of these things are really relying on cross-context identifiers. Now, the big news is that these cross-site identifiers are actually going away slowly and gradually, and that is a pretty major change happening to the ad tech industry. Now, what is driving this change? Number one is increased demand for privacy. Consumers are expecting privacy. As you can understand, that these identifiers are really being used to track you on what you are doing across the internet. And consumers are not liking it because they don't really understand what's going on behind the scenes. So they are expecting privacy and they're getting very serious about it. Then we are seeing legislators are reacting. Europe, California, Brazil, and growing list of other countries and states are tightening privacy regulation. You must have heard about GDPR in Europe or CCPA in California. And then the big companies who run major consumer products like Apple, Mozilla, Microsoft, they are getting very strict to protect consumer privacy. And then the big news recently is that Google is now catching up on that trend. So why did New York Times decided to build its own audience data platform? We as a news publisher, we take consumer privacy extremely seriously. So we saw some of these major changes happening to the industry, and we took a call that why don't we own our own audience data platform? And that's what we started building 2 years back. So some of the features for this program, it uses only New York Times first-party data, and there is no dependency on third-party data. That is, for our direct sold business, when a marketer comes to us, we offer them products or targeting products based on what the users are doing on our site and our mobile apps. We are not relying or not buying anything of what our consumers are doing outside of the New York Times. We understand very thoroughly the behavior of our users across our properties, and we also run surveys in a very authentic way, and we take the consent from the users. That survey data, as well as the behavioral data, is then fed into multiple machine learning models in a highly privacy safe way. Because we decided to own this data as well as all the systems and tooling, we went away from relying any vendor or any data management platform to do this work. So we built in-house and best-in-class tools for audience segmentations, where our ad operations users can go and create audience segments based on what the marketers are expecting from them. And then the users are put into first-party segments and activated into the ad server using highly performant in-house build systems. And then because these machine learning models, which I mentioned in bullet point number 2, they are really the core of how this whole audience platform works. We need to take special care of those models. So there are customized processes to retrain the models and test the data quality on a regular basis so that the models are accurate and are meeting the demand of our marketers. whom we value a lot, by the way. So, as I said earlier, that cross-context identifiers are going away. And because they were the backbone of how so much of advertising works, really we are saying that there's an ad technology storm coming. And the good news is that we are seeing multiple solutions being rolled out from different sections of the industry, which seem to be promising, but then there is a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of study and research all the news publishers and publishers in open web should be doing to make sure that we are ready for that new world. In some cases, we are seeing identifying individuals based on hashed email is the new hot discussion, meaning that there are few companies which what they are saying is that as a consumer, say you go to a site, the site offers you a value exchange that, hey, give us your email address and you will be able to fund our journalism and you will be able to read the content for free. So the consumer provides the email address, and then that email address is encrypted and then passed over the programmatic or the advertising ecosystem so that a buy-side company could really understand who you are based on your email address and whatever data they have collected about you. Now, as you can understand, these are really a proxy to how cross-context identifier used to work, because now really your hashed email becomes a currency for you to know what you are doing over the internet. Then there are some companies like Google, Microsoft, and Apple. They are planning to completely banish user IDs, meaning that there will be extreme restrictions for you to identify a user based on their activity over the internet. But the solutions being proposed are how can you put users into a large cohort, and then as a marketer, you reach to that cohort. That is, it's a large group of users for which it's hard to identify a single user. We believe there is promise in these solutions, and cohort-based targeting would eventually become a new currency in the future. And then, as I said in the previous slide, some plan to double down on first-party data as a currency. So as a news publisher, we need to understand our strengths, what the users are doing on our site, how can we understand more about them, how can we build a better engagement with them, and then also the context, what they are reading is pretty important, and we should be thinking more about contextual-based targeting products. So again, with third-party cookies and IDFA and everything going away, we are seeing a huge interest in publisher first-party data as a new currency. And then new measurement-based tech. Attribution and conversion measurement will be an extremely important factor for a marketer. And what we are seeing now is that there are some solutions coming from Chrome browser, Safari, Apple iOS, that how can this measurement-based tech could work without any reliance on the user identifiers. So moving on, we have to get some of the big questions answered. How do we find innovative ways to monetize effectively based on our own strengths and the data we own? So as I explained in the first-party data program, which we did, we took a very, very hard look in how can we understand our consumers better? How can we relate our marketers' demand for what kind of campaign they are running and what kind of New York Times consumer they want to reach out to? And we bridged that gap and brought them together in a way that they are actually liking some of our own proprietary products versus what they used to get by third-party data-based programs. Then the next big question is how much ad technology and ad monetization should be owned by big tech companies and how everyone comes to a level field. Like we all understand that there is some big share of the pie going to very few companies in the marketing ecosystem. And this is a great turning point in the industry that how can we have privacy safe ad monetization practices, which brings the open web publishers and even some of the big giant companies to a level playing field. And then the big thing to be resolved ultimately is that what is the role of various entities in the industry to protect consumer privacy and how do we come together solving it? So we have publishers, we have advertisers, we have data verification companies, there are data management platforms, supply side platforms, demand side platforms. The industry is complex. The consumers don't understand this. And then everybody have their own viewpoint on what is right for the consumer, what is right for the industry. And I think that is making things more complicated. I think we need to come together. We need to understand that we have to simplify how the industry works. We have to simplify and build the trust with our consumers. And that is how we will be ultimately have a thriving industry and a good future in the next 20 years. So some of these major questions, we don't have much time. Thankfully, the timeline from Google got a bit delayed, but we don't have more than a year to get all of these things resolved. And the situation is getting more and more critical. So with this, I will say thank you. Again, I'm honored to be here, and I will hand it over to my colleague, Mariam. She will be talking more deeply about our data ad products at the New York Times. Thank you. So Mariam, I will hand it over to you. I'll stop presenting.
Thank you. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Let me just share my screen and pick up. Can you all see?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. Pranay gave a great overview of what is happening in the advertising industry and all the changes that are afoot. I'll spend the rest of the time talking more about how the New York Times has responded and the kinds of data products that we have built for our advertising clients. And I'll specifically focus mostly on the kinds of targeting products that we have built, but we have a whole other suite of products that are about insights that we generate for our clients that is around their campaign performance or user behavior to inform how to set up their campaigns in the first place. But in this presentation, I'll focus on targeting, so how the campaigns are set up and where they appear on our site specifically. And I know there are a bunch of questions in the chat, so I'll try to leave time to get to them as well. So just as a bit of context, the New York Times has grown its subscriber base substantially over the last 10 years. In 2020, we were at 7.5 million subscribers, most of whom were digital. This has also really benefited our advertising business as well, because one, we've expanded the user base. So obviously that's just greater reach, which is beneficial. But at the same time, now we have all this data about our subscribers that we could use to build something really interesting for our advertising clients. The other thing to note is that the New York Times has always been very kind of privacy aware. We report about this in our journalism. We had a big kind of project under the opinion section for around privacy and trying to kind of bring more transparency to how marketing and advertising ecosystems work in the digital age. So it's just been something that the company has always been aware of. So as we were thinking about building these kind of data products, we kept an eye out for privacy specifically. So this all started back in 2018 when we kind of got back down to the basics and started with the context, with the stories that we tell and the kind of journalism that we write. So back then, if an advertiser wanted to target a campaign to a particular piece of content, they could use just standard things like a section or a subsection. So for example, they could target a fashion section if that was relevant to their brand. But we developed a product called perspective targeting that is a machine learning model that predicts how an article makes a user feel based on the words that appear in the article. So for example, we have feelings like informed or inspired or hopeful. So an advertiser could target their campaign to such feelings if that is relevant to their brand. I think Adventurous was the first campaign that we ran for, I think it was a TV show. And next, we grew this portfolio further. So we added neutrality targeting, which is just the opposite of an emotion, where it's the absence of a particular emotion. So not fearful, for example. We also developed motivation targeting, which is about how an article motivates a user to behave. So for example, we have make a healthy change or take control of my finances. Next, we developed topic targeting. So we looked at a few years worth of New York Times content, and we looked at like what are the strong clusters of content that emerge that are themes that the New York Times continuously writes about. So some of these things can be, politics, immigration, for example, or it can be about taxes, or it can be about fashion. And all this taken together just shows kind of a breadth of ways that an advertiser can customize their campaign to show up in the right place without compromising a user's privacy, because this is all based on first-party data, and this is all based on just the context and nothing about following the user around on the internet. So here's an example of an article and all the things that we know about it. So this particular article is about people thinking that memory fails as you age and that everyone happens to be wrong. So kind of this, on the left-hand side, we have the standard things, such as the section, which is opinion, subsection, which is Sunday review. We also have times tags, which are the particular tags that journalists pick for a piece of content when they publish it. So in this case, it's elderly, memory, chronological, and age. On the right-hand side, we have these products that we just developed that I was describing. So perspective targeting, this article makes users feel informed, interested, and hopeful. For topic cluster targeting, it's the themes of this article around lifestyle and diet, science and medicine, and biology. And for motivation targeting, we have plan for my future and make a healthy change. So as I mentioned, to date, we have about 20 emotions. I think we have more than what's here. We have 7 motivations, 100 or more topic clusters. And as articles are published, we score them real time for all of these models so that these attributes about the article can be available for targeting immediately, and advertising can show up against that newly published article immediately. Next, we started to think about the audience. So how can we bring in audience targeting also in a privacy safe way? And Pranay talked a little bit about this in his presentation as well. So we had thought how to develop kind of user segments just using New York Times data without relying on any third-party data. And to date, we have developed about 50 demographic segments, and this says 35 plus interest segments, but I'm pretty sure we have more than that right now. But all of this, and I'll go into a bit more detail. I know there are some questions in the chat, but I will go in a bit more detail in how these segments were developed. But for example, here's what we have right now. We have demographics such as gender, age, life stages. We have financial information such as income or investable assets. And we have segments around occupation or career. So we have C-suites here or opinion leaders. And for our interest segments, we also have a lot of them. And some examples here are bookworms or home chefs or jet setters. So how do we build these segments? So there's a process that Pranay described that starts with generating surveys and gathering a truth set about our users. And these are surveys that users opt into, knowing that this data will be used for our advertising purposes. And they provide information such as gender, their age, their income. Then we build lookalike models based on this data. So based on the survey information, as well as data points that the New York Times has around user behavior on site, and these can be like up to 900 different things, we can predict what segments the user belongs into. We validated this, we then validate these models and these results pretty strongly. We've run A/B tests to make sure that these campaigns perform. But in addition to that, we track pretty strongly the model accuracy over time, and we also have pretty stringent model retraining schedules to make sure that the data is always pretty fresh. And we launched this product back in 2020, and to date, I think we're about pretty much transitioned fully away from third-party data as of Q2 of 2021. And I'm going to rush through the last part because I really want to leave time for questions. But what's next for us? The next is to think about user journeys. So how can we make sure that the moment that we show an ad is the correct moment for that user in that context? And we're building things like second-party lookalikes. So our client will send us a list of their customers, and we will build lookalikes around those users. Again, just using first-party data. We've also built what we call click-alikes, which are users who are similar to users who've clicked on a particular brand campaign or a particular type of ad, like people who click on fashion ads, for example. And let's see. So the last thing that is probably worth mentioning is that these are pretty performative, and just for contextual targeting alone, the performance as measured by click-through rates was 7 times IAB standard. When it comes to first party, as I mentioned, we ran A/B tests against their third-party counterparts, and we saw that first party overall performed at least as well as the third-party counterpart, and then in a lot of cases it performed even better. And yeah, we've just been growing our first party audience menu, and this has been the adoption curve just for 2020. But as I mentioned, for 2021, we've pretty much fully transitioned away. Thank you so much, and we can take some questions now.
Thank you very much, Mariam and Pranay, for this excellent presentation and showing us the kind of innovations and the technology and the insight play that you all have at New York Times. So we have a few questions that have come in. One is from Ashwin Ravindranath. What is the type of the first party data you collect in addition to age, name, income, demographics, etc.?
Mm-hmm. I can take that. We don't do geo because geo is just something that we already have and just regular New York Times data. We consider that first party. We collect, let's see, there's like a few, we collect their occupation pretty in detail. I know there was another question from him that was about, like, do you collect their attitudes or aspirations?
Okay,
Not
yes.
really. A lot of those, the interest ones that I showed, are derived from the kind of content that these users read. So, if they read, like, I don't know, like, we have like pretty stringent rules around the number of times you have to read a particular content and so forth. So those are really derived. But there are certain things that, like, there's certain ones that we do ask about. Like, I think influencer was one of them, but I don't exactly remember.
Right, thank you. We have a question from Niharika Raina, who asks, has New York Times developed a Instagram strategy? Is Reels plan to expand touch to the audience?
That's a good question. I think, like, when it comes to advertising business, there isn't a strategy to like have our audience extension on Instagram. But from a marketing perspective, we do promote our stories, which we think can have a strong presence in social media. And that promotion, actually, we also have built a in-house tool to recognize what kind of stories should be promoted to the social media, and for which we will get a good response from the consumers and consumers coming back to our site. So that is one thing which we do on the marketing side. There isn't anything on social influencer targeting and things like that in Instagram from an advertising perspective.
So let me ask you, what about keeping tabs of newer technologies, newer platforms that are emerging? For instance, Clubhouse has become fairly popular. So how do you all decide to embrace that? I know it's not a question which is exactly linked to this session, but how do you really embrace newer technologies, newer platforms that come in and decide whether it is worth your while for New York Times to be there on it?
I can take that up. I think, when it comes to embracing new technologies, like, we are investing and, putting a lot of effort in our audio ads business, because that is like another booming space. So that is one investment. We have been supporting augmented reality ads in certain cases as well, because that is obviously a huge marketer interest we are seeing over there. Clubhouse is still pretty new. So I'll say that, we will take some time to be sure that what kind of consumer interest overall is going into Clubhouse. But as far as wherever we are seeing huge marketer interest, there is a planning or thought process which is going in terms of how do we make our presence better over there.
Okay, we have a question from Srinath. Is there any study which explains the digital advertising on different age groups? Mariam, is there that you would?
I'm not sure. I'm sure there is a study about the impact of advertising on different age groups, but I don't know off the top of my head.
I believe Nielsen and Comscore must be having that data, but I have not seen myself personally.
Right. Tell me, in terms of, we have had issues a couple of years back. In fact, more than that, we had the CMO from Procter and Gamble raising a fuss about the kind of uh, insights and traffic that are generated by digital advertising. And is that something which y'all can assure your advertisers that, well, the traffic that is coming in is for real? It is not being harvested by some hub in back in India or wherever else. Is that something that y'all I'm sure y'all as an organization, New York Times will not practice all these things, but this is a reality of the digital business.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a very complex reality. But what I'll say is that, yes, this is an area where it doesn't make sense for us to build a technology. So what we have is that we have a CDN known as Fastly. Fastly has some protection in terms of like a denial of service attacks and some of the bot related activities, which was basically false traffic for a marketer. And then there is also a new software which the company has installed known as Data Dome. Data Dome is a specialist vendor when it comes to tracking fraudulent activity and then notifying our delivery engineering team on bot attacks happening at the New York Times. So I think what I'll say is that there are ad servers, like obviously we use Google's ad server, and then ad server also has techniques to filter out what it thinks are fraudulent traffic. But then other than that, just to protect any consumer to just make sure that the traffic coming to the New York Times is real, we have some vendors installed in our infrastructure who are acting as the wall in that case.
Right. One of the problems which Indian publishers, especially in the digital domain, are grappling with is the fact that all the money that could possibly be coming is taken away by Google and Facebook, and there's not much that comes in directly to publishers. Now, I know there's a fair amount of discussion that is happening on that front, but how is a publisher like New York Times, which is fairly successful in the digital domain, taking care of that reality?
Yeah, I think that's
Mariam,
really
you want to
hard.
take it up?
Yeah, it's really hard. And I think the New York Times, like everything that we've talked about in this presentation, is for us to have a direct advertising business that circumvents the Facebook and Googles of the world in terms of just going directly to advertisers rather than through this programmatic channel. And it's just, I think it's getting harder by the day. And that's why we build these products, so we have something unique to offer that advertisers could not get if they went through Google or Facebook channels.
Tell me something. We all of these technologies are being developed by New York Times by itself, but wouldn't it help in collaborating with some of the other leading publishers in the US or elsewhere in the world? Because at the end of the day, we are fighting, a few common battles, right?
Yeah, I think you are right. And see, the thing is that in some cases, every publisher has some of their own uniqueness, right? Like we have certain style of our consumers, their reading behaviors, the kind of articles and stories we publish. And from that perspective, it is important for us to say own some of this data and own some of the technologies. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that technology could not be adopted by other publishers. And this is why, we are actually coming to these events and talking about what we are doing, because we do want to tell our partner publishers that how these things could be done. But when it comes to exactly sharing the same platform and the same technology, look, this is what typically the vendors are doing. But our opinion is that sometimes you as a publisher, things are so much specific to you and needs to be so much customized that it's a better idea to own some of this technology, which is very critical to your core advertising business.
So I'm going to ask this question to you, whether, since there are quite a few publishers from India and the rest of South Asia, would if a publisher were to come to New York Times and say that, hey, can we take your technology? Would you be open to sharing some of that or sharing the know-how, etc.?
Yeah. So we have spoken about this, and frankly speaking, it's a tall ask, which always gets a lower priority compared to all the different things we have to do in our advertising roadmap. So the answer to you is, it is an interesting proposition. We are open to discuss about it, but if you think that if you say that we have taken any official stand there, then unfortunately no. And I think there will be layers and layers of approvals which will be required before we are able to do this. But what we can definitely do right now is explain in more detail what the technology we have built, how we have went about building it, and then share those ideas with our partners.
And which you are happy to share and ensure that everybody is embracing that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. So I'm going to ask both of you, since you all are here and you all are sitting on top of the latest trends and insights of audiences visiting, audiences and advertisers visiting newspapers. If you were to look at, look into your crystal ball and try and forecast what do you see happening in the next few years? Because, as a summit of media leaders here, everyone is looking for, and there are definitely a lot more questions than answers. While, for instance, Pranay, you would be perhaps aware of things in India, is that while we all are aware of the fact that digital is where the future is, in terms of revenues in India, digital is not getting the kind of revenues which the newspaper would. Okay? In fact, if a Indian newspaper company has a digital presence and a newspaper presence, a legacy presence, the money is going into the legacy business. Okay, and even though it has been hit by the pandemic, so what do you see as the future? And I know that the scene is dramatically different in the US, where digital is where all the action is, and even long form copy is being consumed on digital. But if you have to look at your crystal ball and try to predict what is happening, because both of you are in the insights business, both of you are looking at future planning, etc. So a question to both of you: would you like to take that, Mariam first, and then to Pranay?
Yeah, I used to think about this a lot when I worked in consulting, because this is the classic, what they call the innovator's dilemma, right? Like, you have a core business that is just really, in the core paper business, that is just really profitable, and the digital is coming, but you just cannot invest in digital. And I think in all those situations, if you look at history and you look across different industries, that kind of drastic change has happened to, like, digital wins, and the companies who are not able to pivot to that transformation will perish, unfortunately. So I think that it's really important. And the question is the pace, obviously, like how fast and how slow that transition will happen will probably vary in different countries and different geographies, but that obviously, like, digital is happening. And so I think it is really important for companies who want to survive to just figure out how to be profitable. And that might mean just spinning off completely new businesses. It might mean building different products and bidding very differently, not just like copy pasting what they're doing in paper onto digital. But I think that is a really important thing for everyone to figure out. I also think that there are going to be like just drastically new forms of media and content that are built for the digital world. and don't look like anything that we have come to know. I think a lot about like, I don't know, there's like Medium and Substack and all these different kind of platforms popping up. And even yesterday, there's like a new platform for like independent writers to write on. So I'm just really excited to see the kinds of like content and the kinds of different storytelling that will evolve thanks to digital. And I think they will just have like very different business models, and they won't look anything like what has worked in the paper world. But I think it's exciting and it's a huge opportunity. So rather than shy away from it, I think people should just be excited and inspired by it.
Great. Thanks. Pranay, over to you.
Yeah, I will agree with Mariam. Like, I think digital, we believe, is ultimately going to win. It's just a matter of time. In some cases, the time could be longer. The other thing which I'll also say is, as an organization, how are we pivoting ourselves? What kind of strategy and vision do we really have to become digital? Because, as a digital product, you need to attract consumers to come to your digital properties. And some of that requires very deep thinking, which thankfully we saw in our leadership a few years back, because clearly New York Times is a 170 years old company, right? And which was a very, very heavy print business. But then the need for digital transformation was very, very, like, had a high stakes, and then the company went for it. And we actually see great revolution happening in terms of how we are moving and increasingly become more and more digital. But coming to the question about the revenue aspects on digital, as you said earlier, the big pie is going to very few companies. And I believe that with all these major ad tech transformations happening, and then the industry is basically doing the reboot, this is a good opportunity for everybody who wants to have a digital presence on the open web to try out new solutions, understand what is going on, and then come up with a 2-year or 3-year strategy to actually have a good consumer experience in terms of the editorial, and then B, also have a good marketing experience so that you are getting enough revenue to make your digital properties better and better.
I'm going to ask you one more question in terms of journalists, right? Because in terms of journalists, the content creators who are there, are you, for instance, Mariam, since you sites, I tell you, working, and this content is not working, right? In terms of how much are they able to take that kind of, right, or take that advisory, because this is a problem that exists here in.
Yeah, no, at the New York Times, we have like a separation of church and state. Like the business side does not talk to the newsroom side, like very, very different organizations. Like I think it's just very kind of distinct, and there is a kind of this culture of just like newsroom is like independent, and it cannot be kind of marred by like the business considerations, because they just cannot be constrained in that way. It's very sacred. And then actually it's really interesting, because even in the data world, like I work on advertising data, but in our data group, we also have people who support the newsroom and who provide data to the editors. And I was chatting with a recent editor recently, and they mentioned that like the amount of data that provide editors, even that is just super constrained and very limited, because they don't want anything about our, like, what are readers reading, even outside the context of the business and outside of the pressures of like driving subscription revenue or advertising revenue. They don't want any of that to kind of lead a journalist to have some kind of internal bias. So it's very, very limited, the kind of data that we share with them, even for their own like analytics teams, let alone like from the business side.
Pranay, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that you were in India not many years back, and you are aware of the context that is there in India. And we had just a few sessions back, Dr. Bhaskar Das, who is with the Dainik Bhaskar group. And clearly, for Dainik Bhaskar group, the newspaper is growing, the circulation is growing, the revenues are growing, etc., because they are essentially in tier 2 and tier 3 India. Now, you did mention about the fact that digital is the way to go, but you do know that in India, in a scenario like India, print is not going to go so easily. So where do you, given the fact what you just said, where do you see for the Indian circumstance, and there are some people from elsewhere in the region, what do you see? How can they handle both, and perhaps be ready for taking the tier 2 and tier 3 markets into the digital domain?
Yeah, I think so. This is a tough question for me, to be honest, in the sense that what we have seen in the US, if we go with that trend, I think it's a matter of time in any country to be more and more digital. It could be, I don't know, it could be 10 years, it could be 20 years. But I'm just saying that, ultimately we do see as a high probability scenario. Now, one thing which I'll say is that even in the New York Times, when we were talking about our print business, which is both subscription as well as advertising, we were actually pleasantly surprised to see that the revenue is based on the anticipation that how much it will fall. It didn't fall. And that's what the reality is in our quarterly reports, because we are a public company. And the reason for that is that we do have consumers who want to hold a newspaper and sit on their couch and then read it rather than, putting strain on their eye in front of a digital screen. And I think, and that is where, about Danik Bhaskar, you have asked, like the tier 2 and tier 3 readers. I think it's time to be more careful about the digital future, not saying that you suddenly leave your print innovation and then invest fully into digital, but it's important to gradually think about both and put more effort into what could be the reality 10 years and 20 years from now. But that, again, that's my personal opinion. I will say that I'm not an expert in this area to be very sure about what I'm saying.
I'm just taking advantage of the fact that you are from India, and I could ask you to remember your past and look at forecasting of what should be there, because that's a reality. That's a reality in India. India, mobile phones, or as many mobile phones as there are people in this country, right?
Right.
And it is there with the lowest common denominator. And yet the fact is that newspapers are flourishing, especially in tier 2 and tier 3 India. So and that's a fact. And
one thing which I'll do, I'll check with my parents and in-laws who are in Delhi that what exactly are they thinking in this area, and I'll confirm on my opinion that whether they will be interested in moving to digital 10 years from now.
Yeah, but perhaps Delhi is again not the answer. It is tier 2 and tier 3 cities where things are changing. The metro market is still has decided to embrace digital, but yeah, perhaps as you mentioned, your parents and your in-laws, that generation may still be open to not as embracing of the digital domain, though they do interact as a communication tool. It is very much there. Thank you very much for this session, for the insights that you've given us, and the practices that you all follow at New York Times. I know it's very early morning for you all there in the New York region in the US. Thank you for your time. And I'm going to hand it over to Makhdoom as he gives his winding up words. Thank you, Pranay, and thank you, Mariam, for your time today.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pranay. Thank you, Mariam, and thank you, Pradyuman. It has been a long day today. We started at 2:15 India time, and quite long for a virtual session. I'm happy that we have so many participants who are still online. And what a way to finish this conference, talking about digital advertising. I mean, we all love advertising. In spite of reader revenue being the next force, but we all love to have still keep the digital advertising going forward. So what a way to finish. We started the day on the first day, on Monday morning, Monday afternoon rather, talking about the worldwide scenario, and then we dived into what's happening in India, and then yesterday we saw about what's happening on the newsroom side, and today we're talking about innovations and revenue. It has been a fantastic 3 days. I'm sure all our participants have a lot of things to take back, digest, and then see what can they take to their organization. So thank you, Pranay and Mariam, joining us from New York, and then wish you a good day. And then I have some customary announcements to make, and then I hope to see you on another occasion somewhere, sometime. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'd like to thank all of our sponsors, Google, Facebook,